All right, so let's get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Zack Norton. I'm a technical product marketing manager at Sigma. You may remember me from such webinars as How Did Stella the Data Analyst Get Her Groove Back? I'm joined here by Travis Benson, one of our preeminent solution engineers in the West. So speaking of webinars, this is going to be a fun session, great intro to Sigma. But coming up, we also have one tomorrow on retail CPG. I'm going to demo some cohort analysis, and we have one next week, what's new in Sigma. That's going to be next Thursday, and it's going to have a lot of great feedback for new features, kind of a great one to pair with this session for follow-up. So thank you for joining. There's two components to this hands-on lab. One is the Sigma free trial account that is available at sigmacomputing.com/free trial. Or free-trial, and then there's a hands-on lab guide. It's a PDF. That's sigmacomputing.com/HOL. It's all you'll need today to follow along. And this will be recorded, so we'll follow up with an email afterwards. That's going to have links to the webinars I mentioned, as well as a recording of this session that you can follow along if you want to just go self-paced. So to get started, log into your free trial. If you didn't find the invite, it might be in your junk spam folder. Follow the link, log in, and we're going to be working on the Sigma sample database. That's the data we'll be pulling through. You don't have to set up a connection. You can get going right within this session. But first, I'm going to launch a poll, and we'd like to get an idea from folks in the audience. Just what are you more familiar with using? Whether it's BI tools, if you're used to Tableau, ClickTech, ThoughtSpot, or if you've always used spreadsheets, Excel, or you export from a traditional BI tool and accomplish your job with a hybrid of both. So that poll's going to lay open while I give you a quick introduction to Sigma. And we can circle back towards the end to get an idea of some of our participants. So I'm going to give a quick agenda, just introductions to Sigma, but we'll get right to the lab, hands-on. There is no SQL or prior technical skills required. Very easy to follow along with Travis. This will be familiar for anybody that's worked with Google Sheets before. So quick introduction, who we are. We are a next-gen cloud analytics tool built for the modern data stack. So we don't have any on-premise baggage. We never have to support a previous piece of hardware installed on somebody's server somewhere. We were always born pure SaaS in the cloud for modern cloud data platforms. So we provide a intuitive spreadsheet experience at cloud scale. So if you think of rows in a spreadsheet, we don't think a million rows is cool. We think a billion rows is cool. So really experiencing cloud scale, but using an intuitive spreadsheet interface to be able to analyze, perform calculations, provide ad hoc discovery. Now, in a lot of cases, we can be the one BI tool, or we can also be just complementary to existing investments. So, hey, you have your traditional reports, but if you want to ask follow-up questions, dive deeper into the data, or scale it out further, that's where we are typically complementary. And lastly, we're brought to you by the same people that brought Snowflake to the market. Mike Spicer, Snowflake's original CEO, went to the drawing board. He wanted to figure out what his next bet was going to be. And all right, well, reinvented cloud data warehouses with Snowflake. What's my next thing? Well, why don't we do cloud analytics? And so I have a larger addressable total market. I'll make sure my next bet can connect to more than just Snowflakes. That's why Sigma can connect to Databricks, Postgres, Google BigQuery, Redshift, AlloyDB, really a lot of different cloud data warehouses that we can connect live to. But again, we never move the data out. Once we connect, it remains secure. It's a live connection. We can inherit some of the security and governance of those cloud data platforms. And what will be inside today, and what I'm actually inside right now, is a Sigma workbook. I've embedded these slides in the workbook. So on the next page, I'm going to hand off to Travis. He's going to show you building dashboards, visualizations, all with the familiar spreadsheet experience. Our pivot tables, which are enterprise pivot tables. They can scale for billions of rows, really easy to be able to do multi-level calculations. You can drill anywhere, and you'll see the exploration and collaboration in real time. that I can hand off to Travis, and we could create a narrative story with text and images throughout this lab. And you can embed elements into Sigma. You can embed Sigma into Salesforce or a web portal. We scale out very easily for embedding all these different elements. And we have 400 plus customers. Some of them are using us for more enterprise deployments. Others are more complementary. Really a great swath of different use cases, whether it's retail like the webinar that's going to be run tomorrow, or if it's more within financial technology, CPG, healthcare, because we don't move the data out. We're immediately HIPAA compliant, a lot of flexibility in different use cases that we can tackle. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to move over to this next page, and Travis is going to take over and start sharing and beginning the lab. And I'll be in the questions tab for anything that pops up.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Zach. For everybody on the line, nice to meet you. I'm Travis. I am a solutions engineer here. I work out of San Francisco, and we'll be walking through the virtual hands-on lab that Zach linked earlier. This should be a relatively straightforward lab. Hopefully, not too many of you get lost today. If you do, you can always put a question in the chat, and you can ask the presenters to have me slow down. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. And it looks like everybody should be seeing this right now. So like Zach said, this is really the homepage of Sigma when you land and launch the application. It is a web-based application, so there's no installation of software, and it's going to look and feel very similar to Google Sheets or Excel, with the main caveat or difference being that we're directly connected to your cloud data warehouse of your choosing. So if you're following along in the lab, everybody please turn the page to 3.1, which says Introductions to Sigma Workbooks. I'll give everybody about 10 seconds or 15 seconds to navigate there, and then we'll pick up going forward from there. Alrighty, so my hope is that you've navigated to Module 3, which is Introductions to Sigma Workbooks. And this is going to give you a little bit of a background on the data that we're looking at today. So the first thing that we're going to have everybody do is we're going to go ahead and click on Create New in the top left. Now we have two main objects within Sigma. We have datasets and workbooks. Workbooks are going to be for folks that have come from traditional BI backgrounds. They're going to look and feel like dashboards. And data sets are going to be more of our modeling layer that we won't really get to in this demonstration. So go ahead and click on New Workbook, and that's going to load this editor. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to grab some data. And in order to get the data to work with, we're going to import basically a table here. So you go ahead and click on Table. And we're going to grab from some tables and data sets that we have. Everybody should have the Sigma sample database. Once you find the Sigma sample database, we'll go ahead and click on examples here. And following the guide from examples, we'll scroll down till we see Plugs Electronics. And then we'll click on this Plugs Electronics hands-on lab. So this is a really important step. Just to get the data in that we're going to work with. And all you have to do from here is click the select button and you should be good to go. So that's just the setup part that I wanted to walk everybody through. I am going to step back into my other canvas that has Zach here just to show off some of our live editing features. So I'm going to once again go through that process one more time, re-import that table. So I'm going to grab a table, data set, examples. We're going to go over to our Plugs Electronics, and we'll grab our hands-on lab. So I'll select that. Oop. Do that one more time real quick. Select that, and here we are. So at this point, everybody should be right around step 3.13. Now, what you'll notice here is we're basically in this collaborative canvas that's going to look and feel similar to Excel Sheets or Excel or Google Sheets. You'll see in the top, we have some formatting options, we have a formula bar, and we have all the details of our columns. Now, the data that we're looking at today is, think of like a big box retailer that sells electronics, maybe a Best Buy. And we'll be looking at basically how many sales that they've done at different stores across the United States throughout their product types, product families, and product names. So the first thing that we might want to do is oftentimes business users want to be able to basically do some ad hoc calculations on the base data sets that live in their cloud data warehouse. So a good example of this might be formatting the cost and the price columns into currency. So what you can do is you can actually click on these columns and you can just go ahead and hit format as currency. And I can do this for price as well. And now I've formatted both of these columns to the correct format that I need to do my work. For those of you that are following along, we're at section 3.18 right now. And what we're about to do now is we're going to add some columns, and we can use those columns to enhance our analysis. So if you click on this drop-down menu right next to any column header, you have a lot of options from here. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to add a new column. When we add this new column, Sigma immediately prompts us into our formula bar. So we can do a couple things. We can actually create calculations on the fly. So what I might do is I might type in quantity, and I'll notice that that quantity column becomes highlighted. And then I might want to multiply that by my cost. So if I go ahead and do that, multiply quantity by cost, I have a new calculated field, and I'm going to call that my cost of goods sold. Just like that, me as a business user, I was able to do some form of calculation directly on the cloud data warehouse without having to go to my BI team. And this is super useful for our business users throughout anybody who's using Sigma, because it really speeds up their time to develop data assets, and they can provide their business context in real time. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add in one more formula here. So we'll add in a new column, and we'll take our quantity and we'll multiply that by our price. And now we have a revenue column. So we'll call that revenue. So I'm just following along in my worksheet here. And then we'll do a couple more calculations. Maybe we want to calculate our profit. So we'll take our revenue less our COGS. And then we get a column that we can call profit. You'll notice here that this formula bar is it's incredibly dynamic. If you can do a function within Excel or Google Sheets or even in SQL, it's very likely that you can encode that logic into this formula bar. So it doesn't just have to be addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. You can use if statements, you can do sum ifs, count ifs, basically all the functionality that you're really familiar with in Excel. You can just open this function index at any time to see all the functions that we support. So we really are trying to make this look and feel like Excel for our end users. So the last calculated column that we might do is we might add in our margin. So we can just take our profit, we'll divide that by our revenue, and then we're going to get a margin. I don't want this to be done as a currency, so I do want to format it into a percent, and now I have my margin really quickly. Perfect. So I'll give everybody some time to catch up there. You might have noticed that some of these queries were coming back really, really quickly. Sigma has a very interesting technology that we call Alpha Query, that if we don't have to push down the query to the cloud data warehouse and we can compute it in the browser for you, we will do that, and we can save quite a bit on cost by doing that. So when you do simple arithmetic, it's pretty unlikely that we're actually going to push that down to the warehouse, and we can just compute it in the browser for you automatically. So now that we've done our essentially cleanup or enrichment of the data set that our data team has handed off to us, what we're going to do now is we're going to start doing some visualizations. And for those of you who are following along, we're at section 3.23 at this point in time. Or sorry, 3.22. So where we'll go from here is we're going to create a child element off of this data asset. And we will create a visualization. So once we do that, any filters or logic that we apply to this data set above are going to be inherited by this bar chart or this graph that we're trying to make. Now, the type of visualization that we're going to use is going to be bar, but you can see that we have many other types of visualizations that we support out of the box. But we'll stick with bar for this analysis. And then what we'll do is we'll start adding some data to our x-axis and our y-axis. So we'll start by grabbing our store region. You can just type in region here if you'd like. And when you type in store region, that's going to grab us our x-axis. And then for our y-axis, we might want to grab our profit. So we can go ahead and drag our profit right up into the y-axis. So everything is drag and drop within Sigma. And now we have our profit by region. As I hover over these, I can see that the West is performing the best and the Southwest is performing the worst. So just like that, we have made a pretty simple bar chart here. So the next thing that we might want to do is add another visualization type. So in this version, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a visualization in a little bit different of a way. And this is section 3.26, if you're following along. So I can always hit this plus button here to add elements to my canvas. And here I want to add in a viz. And I'm going to use a workbook element. So I will use this workbook element that says plugs electronics hands-on lab data. It should have this little icon that's saying it's being used as a source for other visualizations. So we're going to use that again. And now that I'm here, we'll go ahead and use a line graph. And we're going to calculate revenue over time. So we'll use a line graph to do this. So for those of you following along, we are now at 3.28. So we'll first start by dragging our date into our x-axis. And then on our y-axis, we are going to grab our revenue. So we'll hit plus here. We can type in rev. That'll give us our revenue. And you will notice this is quite grainy because it's looking at revenue on every single day. And maybe I don't want to look at this over such a short time period. So date truncation in Sigma is really, really simple. If I go ahead and click on the day of date, I can go down into this truncate date modal. And I can go ahead and truncate this down by month. So you'll notice that in the formula bar, what it's actually doing is it's just wrapping that date column in a date trunk formula. So very similar to Excel. And then maybe what I might want to do is I might want to split this out by region, just like I did in the bar chart above. So I can go ahead down to this color and I can say, well, I want to color it by a category. And I can select my column here. So once again, I'll type in region, hit enter. And then that's going to break out our revenue by month, by region. So we can see here that the blue line, or the Southwest, while it is performing low in profit, it is actually gaining share amongst the other regions. And we'll see that the Midwest is also declining. So we can start to see trends in our data. So just making some bar charts and line graphs for the time being. So now you heard Zach talking about our pivot tables. Now let's create a pivot table with this data. So maybe we can look at our profit and our revenue and our margin by different states and regions. We can start drilling anywhere there. So once again, we'll hit the plus icon in the add element. we're going to create a pivot table now. And we're once again going to use this plugs electronics element, which now has two sources to it. So we should have a blank pivot table here, and this should look pretty similar to using it in Excel or Google Sheets where we have rows, columns, and values. And for those of you following along, at this point, we are at section 3.213, so 3.213. And we're going to start adding in some pivot rows here, things that we might want to slice and dice this data set by. So we'll start with the region. We might want to add a row underneath that, or the product type, for example, that's in the guide. So we're creating our basically hierarchy here. And then the column that we might want to use is our date. So we'll go ahead and put in our date. And once again, we're going to run into that grain problem. This is going to be a day of date, and we don't want to do 1,000 columns in our pivot table. So once again, we can go ahead and truncate this date, and we'll do this date by year. So we've now truncated this by year. So if y'all didn't see that, once again, if you hit the drop down, go to truncate date, go ahead and click on year. So now we have 6 or 5 columns, a little bit easier, or 6 columns, a little bit easier and more manageable to work with here. And now we need to start putting in some values. The first thing that we might want to do is we might want to sort the year of date descending. So if you click on year of date up here with this drop down, we can sort this and just change the order to have 2023 as the first year, the most recent year. And we can start in adding our values. So we'll add in our profit and our profit margin. So I'll just start dragging these. So we'll grab in profit. You'll notice that it will automatically aggregate these for us. And then we'll grab in our margin. And some of you may have noticed this blue line running across. That's actually us issuing the queries directly to Snowflake. And then they're coming back within Sigma. And you'll notice here that we might have something off within our sum of profit margin. And the reason for that is we don't actually want to sum our margin. We want to take the average of our margin. So if we click on margin in the values, we can go ahead and set the aggregate to an average. Now this should start to look a little bit more realistic for our business, which indeed it does. Perfect. Now we can show some totals here if we'd like to see some more summary descriptions. So we could go ahead and click on our product type. And we could click show totals. And that'll give us some totals at the end of our pivot table if we'd like. Perfect. So for those folks following along, skipping a couple steps in the hands-on lab, some things that I do like to go through that might not be in the hands-on lab that our users do use quite frequently. So this isn't going to be in the deck that you see, is this idea of conditional formatting. So looking at this pivot table, it might be hard for somebody to kind of see trends or see outliers within our margins or our profits. So if you ever want to add some color to your graphs or charts, you can go ahead and click the drop-down menu next to any of these values, and we can add in some conditional formatting. So in this case, I might want to add in a color scale. I can change the color if I wanted to. Maybe we'll go to red, green. And we can start to see the trends of our margin. And maybe something that I might want to do is I might want to sort by average of margin, so I can start to see highest and lowest margins across the regions. So it just helps us understand what's performing well and what isn't performing as well. So it looks like mobile phones are doing pretty well. Perfect. So at this point, we might want to save our analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this, but for you all, you should see a save button here. Very important to save your explorations within Sigma so you can access them. So I'm going to publish this version. That's going to be my version of save, but you should have a save button and you should be able to give your workbook a title. should say, you could call it plug sales exploration if you wanted to. And then once you hit the save button, you can start to share this workbook with other folks. So maybe I want to add other people on my team. If I hit this drop down, I can then share this with other teams. So if you've configured teams within Sigma, you could type in a team name like a team for that matter. Or maybe I want to just share it directly with my manager. So I'll share it off to Steve. And then I can say, hey, check out mobiles. So we can get Steve in this workbook, gone ahead and shared that with him. And we've saved that as well. Alrighty. Before we move on to module 4, Zach, were there any questions that came up in the chat that we can address?
I think one real good one is let's start out with talk a little bit about how about we don't modify the underlying data, and we're not moving the data either. Can you talk a little bit about like the SQL getting issued and how the calcs work?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the beauty of Sigma is it's a live query mechanism that we work off of. So every single thing that we've done in this canvas has essentially been issuing SQL statements for us. So we've taken the hard work out of having to learn SQL and presented it in a way that almost everybody in the business can understand, which is Excel. So whenever I do any calculations or whenever I'm creating visualizations for that matter, and you saw that blue line going across. So if I wanted to, I could just simply apply a filter to this, or I could drill into some specific area. So let's just filter this by, I don't know, month of date. So I'll just do a quick filter. I'll just do the last 2 years here. So you don't have to do this on your end. Just take the last 2 years. So see, when it's running that query, it's actually issuing that down to Snowflake. And if I click on my query history here, I can see the queries that I've fired. So we can see the Sigma runtime, so 300 milliseconds, and then the warehouse runtime. So this could be Snowflake or Databricks or Google BigQuery or whatever warehouse your team is really using. And then you can also see the exact SQL that it's issuing. So our business users never really have to know about this. And it's essentially doing all the hard work for them by just using Excel-like syntax to generate the SQL and pushes it right to the warehouse.
Great. Another good question. Oh, you want to show the browser calcs? Any of those going to show up?
Yeah, let's see the browser calculations. So if we view browser calculations, so of the 16 queries, 12 of them actually executed in the browser. So this is, once again, I was talking about some cost savings that we send back to our clients. If Sigma doesn't have to go to the warehouse to execute a query, we're not going to go to the warehouse. And that's just an efficiency gain in terms of the time it takes to render the results as well as cost to your business. So we'll go ahead, take a look at those browser calcs. And you can see here that anything with a green check mark is actually a browser calculation. And then the circular green check marks are the ones that are actually going down to the warehouse. So right about 50% of the queries that we've ran today have been just done directly in our browser, opposed to being pushed down.
And another question, you showed the sharing functionality. Do we integrate with Active Directory?
Zach, that might be a question for you to take, actually. I believe that we do.
Yeah, so Active Directory, we can tie in with any kind of SAML 2.0 SSO. So I'm not sure if Google Contacts would work the same way, but typically in the onboarding, you would tie in with the SSO permission. We can even tie in with SCIM for some of those user permissions that are being managed within an Active Directory type system. And then once you go into the share functionality, you can point it right over to those folks and get everybody on board of the platform at the same time into different teams.
Perfect.
All right, I think we're good for the next module.
Okay. So now we should be at module 4. If you've been following along with our guide, I'm going to actually remove this filter that I had here. So delete that. Everything should be back to where we were. In module 4 talks about creating dashboards. So what we've done here is we've done a lot of ad hoc analysis, which is useful, but maybe we want to make this analysis a little bit more official, and so we can share this out with folks. So in order to create a dashboard, what we'll want to do is we'll want to start organizing our canvas and our page. So what I like to do, generally speaking, is I like to take the data that I'm using and I like to put that onto a different page because it's not necessarily that useful as itself right now. So if we click on these 3 little dots, we can move this to a new page. And this should look and feel just like Excel. We're creating pages down here. So we're going to call this our dashboard if we double click on it. And then we'll call page 2 our data. Gone ahead and moved that. And so now we might want to start reorganizing our elements here a little bit. So to resize things within Sigma, instead of hitting the 3 dots, I can grab these 6 dots, which will allow me to start dragging my elements around. So if I go ahead and click and hold on that, I'll see that I get this green or this blue line that shows up. That's going to tell me where my element's going to land in place. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it right next to the bar chart. And we now should see this dashboard starting to come together with these 2 plots side by side. So now we might want to give the dashboard a little bit of context for our users. So if you're following along, we're on 4.1.5 at this point in time. And we can start adding things to give it more context, like this text element. So we'll go ahead and we'll add an element. And we're going to add a text element, a UI element here. And the element will land directly below here, or might land somewhere else for you all. But I'm going to go ahead and drag that once again up to the top of the dashboard. And now I have this new text element. So you might also notice that there's other elements that you can add in here. So you could add in images to personalize it. You can create buttons that bring your users to other applications or workbooks or websites or PDFs. We do have an embed, which means we can embed things on other websites or applications into your workbook. So if you wanted to embed like Google Sheets or Google Slides, like you saw Zack doing, that can be done as well. We have spacers and dividers as well. We'll visit most of these control elements a little bit later in the virtual hands-on lab as well. So we have that text element that we've added, and this is going to look and feel just like, traditional text editing here. I might want to change this to a medium heading, and we'll go ahead and call this sales performance. Just like that, we're just adding a little bit of context for our end users. And then maybe we want to add in one more text box. So we'll go ahead and hit that plus icon again. We'll grab some more text and we can just give this a little bit more context. So we'll say this dashboard used to explore regional sales performance. Don't have to write this exactly, just kind of showing you how it works. So you can get comfortable with the interactions here. So the next thing that we might want to do is we might want to add a control element to our visualization. Basically allow our end users to filter all of these visualizations by a date, for example. We'll start with a date for this because it's probably the easiest to work with these graphs if we're using a date filter. So if we hit the plus icon again, and we're in section 4.18 at this point, we can scroll down into our control elements and we can go ahead and click on a date control element. These are really powerful and super useful when building dashboards to give that next level of interactivity to your users. So you can see here that the filter type, we can support a lot of different types of filters. for this, we're going to use a date range. And we want to set a description to this. Opposed to this saying new control, you might want to call this date range. Date range. I'm going to change the name of it to date range here. And then the control label is actually what the end user sees. So your control ID, it needs to be unique. But your control label is what the user is actually going to see. So we might say select a date range. That's changed that now. So now that we have this created, if we click on things, we'll notice that it's actually not updating our graphs right now. So if I did last 3 years, I apply that filter, none of my graphs changed. And the reason that they haven't changed is because we haven't told Sigma that we want this control element to actually control elements that are on our page. So you should see this targets button on your page. Let's add some targets to this control element so that we can start controlling those other elements. So if I hit add target, we'll go into my current dashboard. Let's grab that sum of profit by store region. Let's also grab that sum of revenue. And you'll notice as I'm clicking on these things, they're starting to take the filter that I've applied. Let's also do the pivot table while we're at it. So just like that, we've now made a control element that affects all 3 elements that we have on our page. So at this point in time, your users can actually filter their data set as they see fit with this date filter. So they could do between dates, they could use our date filter in any way that they see fit. But this is just how you would add one control element to the page. So for those of you that are following along, we're on section 4.114. And what we might want to do is just clean this up before we share this out with users. It's starting to look pretty good, but maybe we don't want folks to see the data tab. And something we can do as a user here is we can go ahead and click on the data tab and we can hide that. So folks that are actually exploring this data set aren't going to see this tab. So if we have a lot of data assets here that we don't want them to get confused in, we can just go ahead and hide that from them. And the closed eye icon says that it's hidden. So if I went to go ahead and preview this as an explorer, you'll notice that I actually don't see that data tab. I can only see that data tab if I'm editing. Perfect. So let's publish this, save our copy. So we'll go ahead and publish from here. Thank you, Zach, for adding in the image. You will notice that Zach is showing off some of our live edit that just came out. So multiple people can be working in the same workbook at the same time. It's quite awesome. So go ahead and publish this. Perfect. And now let's talk about exploring the dashboard. So now that we've created this data asset for our teams, let's talk about the ways that our end users can actually utilize this dashboard and get value. Now, something that we pride ourselves on here at Sigma is this ability to get down to the root of the data that we're actually visualizing. So we call it drilling anywhere. So wherever my exploration takes me as an end user, I can go and I'm unrestricted by what my BI team has modeled. As long as it's in that base data set, I can utilize it. So if you're following along, we'll be at section 4.23. You can read the prompt, but essentially we can just say, hey, I'm a store manager and I want to look into some performance across my regions. So if I right click on basically any visualization in Sigma, you'll notice that we have this drill down capability. So maybe in the West, I want to drill down by my product family, for example. What that's going to do is it's going to issue a new query. And now I have my revenue by each product family. If I want to maximize these elements as an explorer, I can start to see it on a little bit larger of a scale. And I can also do things like sorting this for myself if I wanted to. So I can sort this product family by maybe the sum of profit. Just cleaning things up a little bit for myself. Now, at any time, I have access to the underlying data, right? So we're not hiding this away from our end users. We give them the full ability to explore in this underlying data to do some type of root cause analysis if they need to. But I can keep drilling from here. I'll go ahead and drill down even more into smartphones. Maybe I want to drill down into the state that the smartphones are selling in. See, California is relatively high. And then I can drill down even more. And maybe I want to drill down into my product name, get down to the actual products that are selling. I can do other things here as well. So I can go ahead and take this sum of profit and I can filter it. Maybe I only want to see products that are above 300,000, looks like a pretty high number. So I'll go ahead and filter this as an end user, just refining my searches. So we'll take 300,000 as our minimum. Rerun that. And that quickly, as a store manager, I can find out what specific phones in California are selling at the highest rates. And I can use this information to run my business, right? Maybe I want to make sure that our inventory levels are fine on these products so we don't end up with stockouts or you name it. Essentially, the beauty of this tool is that we can allow your end users to get down to the root cause or the underlying data really quickly without limiting them by having to learn some proprietary language or having them know how to write SQL. Great. So I just did a lot of things there in the hands-on lab for those that were following along. So we did some drill downs. Another thing that it talks about is actually adding in some of these paths to our dashboard. So if we want to, we can set filters from here. Let's see. Sorry about that, folks. Just reading along the end of this lab. So Zach, I would say, considering we have about 15 minutes left, I think this is a pretty good spot to stop. For those of you that want to keep finishing the lab, I highly recommend you going through. For those of you who were following along, we stopped at right about 4.25. From there, you can take your exploration further. The hands-on lab goes for another 20 or so pages to talk about other things that Sigma can do.
Yeah, and we got a few questions here. So one relevant one, especially with the live collab, as you're continually modifying a dashboard, is there some aspect of version controlling within Sigma?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we want to take a look at version control, we can view our version history here by clicking on where it says draft version or published version. And you can see basically all the changes that everybody has been making. So this is all the changes that happened today. Literally every single thing that we've done to this workbook. We can roll back to previous versions of our dashboard if we wanted to. That's totally fine. You can see here I'm clicking on the different versions and it's actually updating the dashboard so we can see what they were. So we'll go back there so we can just see the version history there. No, absolutely.
And I think coming up soon, we'll have a larger enterprise approach for some version controlling for going from staging to production. And that's going to be a feature called version tagging. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to cover that next Thursday for what's new in Sigma. That may be the following session, but really a great way to be able to, especially if you're going down the route of enterprise embed, we're going to have a very robust solution there for making sure that you can test workbooks, get feedback, and then figure out a strong programmatic way to promote them for different users. Okay, somebody would also like the link to the follow along doc. Let me just post that again. That's www.sigmacomputing.com/HOL. Let's display that as an announcement here. It should pop up at the bottom of the Brightpoint app, Bright Talk. So that is available. This session is also recorded, so you get a follow-up email. And one last question. What's the difference between explorers and viewers?
Yeah, great question. So generally speaking, an explorer will have that drill down capability. So they can actually come into these analyses and drill down and explore further. Now, a viewer is not going to have that capability. So they're basically going to be able to see the static dashboards, but they won't be able to drill down from here, right? So it's an explorer allows them to massage the data and basically do more exploration, whereas a viewer might be somebody who's just looking at KPIs for that matter and doesn't want to do much more exploratory analysis.
That's why viewers are free.